Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Ollie. Welcome to the next tutorial in this series of Java for Beginners. In this tutorial, we're going to be going over Boolean logic and if and else statements. So you may have heard of if and else statements before. It's a pretty simple concept once you've got the hang of it. Probably the hardest thing about this is learning how sort of Boolean logic works and how the algebra behind it works. So let's get started. I'm going to teach you first of all about a new variable type, and that variable type is called the Boolean. So much like we declare integer variables or string variables, we're simply going to write the word Boolean. And what a Boolean is, it's a value that holds true, either true or false, and it's as simple as that. It takes up, theoretically, it takes up 1 bit of memory, but it may take up plus or minus that depending on certain factors. But basically, once we've written Boolean, we can give it a name as usual. So I can just call this say test, because it's a logical test, and we can set this equal to true, for example. And we can make up any sort of statement out of this bit here as long as it would return a true or false value. So say up here I create int a equals 10, and then here int b equals 20. We could make a Boolean test. We could, the value of this, as long as it comes out as true or false, we can set it equal to this test variable here. So let's say, for example, a is greater than b, and we can use this greater than operand, and I'll show you all of the different ones we can use in just a second. But basically what's happening here is we're making a Boolean variable called test, and we're setting it equal to whether a is greater than b. In this case it's false, so this statement here is false, and therefore test is equal to false. So that's pretty much the simplistic, the most simple level we can look at it. I'll show you quickly just all the different types we can use. It's pretty self-explanatory. So we can use the greater than symbol or the less than symbol, as you just saw, and we can also do less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, and then finally we can test if it is exactly equal to by using 2 equals. And the reason we're using 2 equals is because 1 equals is the assignment operator, as we already know, and that assigns the value of the left hand side to the value of the right hand side. If we're comparing them to see if one is equal to the other, then we use this double equals here. The final one is to test if it's not equal to it, and we simply do this by doing an exclamation mark and then an equals, and you can read this as a not equal to b. Okay, so now you know a bit more about Boolean variables. We're gonna go ahead onto the main lesson, if and else statements. So actually I'm gonna keep what we have here. Or actually, okay, we'll remove this and we'll make it again in a second. So what is an if statement? Basically, an if statement will take a parameter and it will test if the parameter is true or false, and it can be in the form of simply a Boolean variable, because a Boolean will either be true or false, or it can be in the form of a test like we did, such as whatever is greater than whatever. So let me show you what the if statement looks like first of all. First we write the word if, and you see it highlights in blue. It's a built-in Java keyword. We then put the 2 brackets like so, and inside the brackets is where our logical test goes. So if up here I make a Boolean variable called test again, I'll just set it equal to true for argument's sake, and then we can put test in here. So this if statement is now testing the value of test. If it's true, then the if statement is going to be entered, and we put the if state in these in a block like we do with methods. If the value of test is true, then inside here is going to be executed. If it's false, then this will simply be ignored, and we will carry on to the next line of code. That would be down here. So let's just, for argument's sake, print out a line here. We'll say test is true, and I will drag the output up for you so you can just see this in action. We'll hit run, and you can see test is true. That's because we did set test and it equal to true. The if statement will test the value of it. If it's true, then the statement will run. If it's false, then it will just ignore it. So you can see this by, if I set this to false and press run, you'll see that simply nothing happens, and that's because it reached here and it skipped over. So what if we want to do something else if this was false and the test skipped over it? It's a bit of a waste to write another if statement to say if test is not true, for example, like that. there's no point in writing that because we can just use something called the else statement. Now you can lay this out in different ways. I'm going to put it on the next line just to show you, to make it more clear. Another common way is to write it at the end like this and then make it like that, but I'll keep it like so for now. So all you have to do for the else statement is write the word else and then open and close a block. The else statement doesn't need to take a parameter because the else statement will run if the test that preceded it is false. So in this example we have here right now, test is equal to false, and I'm just going to copy and paste this line of code here, and I'm just going to change that to false. So what's going to happen here is it's going to say, is test true? Nope, it's not true, it's false. So we're going to ignore this block here, and we're going to skip down to the else statement. So this program here is going to print out test is false, as you can see there. So okay, I'm going to show you now just some basic things that beginners sometimes get confused with when they're testing Boolean values. What I've seen in the past is people doing this. They say is test equal to true. Now that is a perfectly valid way of doing it, but because test is already a Boolean variable, this part is already implied. So we can remove that simply because what the if statement does, the thing inside of the brackets, it's going to test if it's equal to true. So in this case, it would say is test equal to true, true, and that's just sort of an extra little step that we didn't really need to add in. Some people write this to see if test is equal to false. Now I can see why people would do that, since there's no obvious way of checking if this is false, but I'll show you now. The easiest way to check if this is false is to simply put an exclamation mark in front of it, and you can read an exclamation mark in Java as not. So basically if not test, and in this case test is false, so it's basically saying is it not true, and yes, it is not true, so it's going to run this statement in here. So one final thing I'm going to show you about if and else statements is else if statements. Now else if statements are useful if you have more than one condition you need to test, but only one of them can come out being true. So the easiest way to do this, if we declare some variables, say int a equals 10, int b equals 20, int c equals 30, like so, we can now test multiple conditions for these things. The first condition we will do is just simply by an if statement. We'll say is a greater than b. If this is true, then we will simply print out system.out.println, and we can write a is greater than b. So what happens now if we don't want to just do an else statement? Because in this case, if we did an else statement, it would be the same as saying, basically, if anything but this is true. So at the moment is a greater than b. So for example, if a was less than b, or if a was equal to b, then it would go to an else statement if we have one. If we wanted to test multiple conditions, like very specific conditions, for example, we only want to test now, we also want to test if a is exactly equal to b, because an else statement wouldn't handle that, because it would also test for ones less than it. We would then say else if, like so. And it's pretty simple if you just imagine it as doing an else statement. So for example, if this is false up here, so else, then do another if statement like this, and you could give it another parameter. So I'll check if a is exactly equal to b. Then we can go system.out.println, and I'll say a is equal to b. And then I'll add a final else statement just to say .println, there we go, just to say a is less than b. And that's because we've tested if a is greater than b. If this is false, it's going to move down to the next condition. If a is equal to b, it's going to print out that. If it's not greater than b and it's not equal to b, so in other words, if it's less than b, then it's going to go to the final else statement. And you're not limited to one else if statement. You can have as many else if statements as you want. And I realize I haven't really included C into the equation, so I'll just remove that. You can have as many else if statements as you want. And there's slightly quicker ways of doing this, but we'll get onto that in other tutorials. For now, all you need to know is that we have if statements, else if statements, and else statements. if statements initially test a condition to see if it's true, else if statements test any other conditions you may want to see if they're true, and finally, if all ifs and else ifs were equal to false, it will finally go to the else statement. And just to clarify, say this was false and we move down to the next one, and this was true, it will then do things in here, and it will simply skip over to the end. It won't do the else statement because this one was true. So I'm just going to run this little example we have here just to show you. So now it should say, yep, A is less than B, that's because it was. If I set A equal to 20, so it becomes equal to it, it should be correct. A is equal to B, there we go. Now if I make A equal to 21, you'll see that A is greater than B. So there we go. In this tutorial we covered else statements, if statements, and else if statements. We also covered a bit about the Boolean variable and how we can form logical tests using the Boolean variable. In the next tutorial I'm going to be teaching you how we can use new operands that you won't have seen before, new operands to test for multiple conditions, and other stuff like that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.